Welcome to the Dark Mind Podcast. Friends and familiars, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dark Mind Podcast, where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, I have a writer-director that has been part of the indie filmmaking world for over a decade. He's joining me today to discuss his recent film entitled It Visits Me, as well as his previous and upcoming work. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Cameron Gallagher. Cameron, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this 16th day of May 2024. I came across your short film entitled It Visits Me on Alter and was really blown away by the slow, creeping dread that you infused into a short period of time. The direction and sound design created an immersive experience that was visually terrifying, so I really enjoyed it and am excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Yeah. You know, it's always fun to hear people's reaction when shorts like this go out there and are live and kind of getting a sense of what people think of them. So I'm excited to talk about all the short films and all the things scary.
Absolutely. All the things scary. Well, so the film is about a young woman named Leela who calls her sister Abigail for help when she finds herself unable to stay in her current living situation. Her sister is very religious, to the point when Leela first arrives, Abigail warns her that she may be visited by an angel that's been showing up at night. However, when the angel does visit, Leela finds that it's much different than what Abigail described. So this story, I got a little conflicting information from IMDb, but according to the YouTube description anyway, this story was written by Jeremiah Lewis, Alison Giambruno. I hope I'm not butchering that.
Giambruno, yeah. It's pretty close.
Okay.
You got it, yeah.
Giambruno. And yourself. So when you're collaborating with other writers, do you primarily direct the flow of the narrative into the appropriate form that will not only translate onto the screen better, but will also be doable in terms of the budget? And can you expand on that process?
Yeah, the writing process is really an interesting one for me. I am someone who I don't consider myself a writer in a sense of I'm going to be the one to maybe put pen to paper always. I look at myself as more of the story and sort of the structure and unfolding things because I do love storytelling. Of course, as a filmmaker, it's all about storytelling. So, you know, in this particular case, It Visits Me was an idea that I kind of had a long time ago that was a little bit different. It was more just the idea of a friend telling a friend that they see something every night and sort of the idea of having to disregard that in a way. So Allison is actually my girlfriend, and years later we were talking about this idea, and she threw out the idea that it kind of sounded similar to people who have religious experiences. So they have been visited by angels, or that they've had things spoken through them. So, you know, we had kind of chatted about that, and I thought that was really an interesting idea. And then Jeremiah and I have been doing a lot of films together. So we sort of sat down and we're like, okay, how can we figure this out? And a lot of it usually is, you know, what do we have access to? What are we able to pull from? What talent do we have around us that we already know we can utilize? And how can we just make the best possible short film? Because I think a lot of making short films and just making films in general is kind of getting the best bang for your buck. And especially at this level where everything's self-funded, you really have to. And you really want to showcase what you're able to do on that low budget. So, you know, in this case, it was really writing something that was based around that central idea and sort of the tension of that as well. if someone tells you something's going to happen, knowing it's going to most likely happen, there's some suspense there, but then also trying to subvert that and use that to create something that's still scary. There's still anticipation and that tension, while at the same time, you're not feeling too familiar, which I think in the YouTube short space can be really difficult.
Yeah. And you mentioned self-funded. Is that primarily through like Kickstarters, or do you actually get investors? Which, well, I guess that wouldn't be self-funded.
Right. Well, no. I mean, a lot of filmmaking, though, is considered self-funded, even at that smaller scale, where it is maybe a small investor. Usually it's not like a studio backing or something along those lines. In my case, a lot of it is myself. We do have a few producers. Jeremiah Lewis, who obviously is a writer, he also produces and executive produces a lot, puts a lot of funding in. And then we have other producers we've taken on. James Denton, who actually produced It Visits Me as well. He kind of gave us some money, and he was on a couple short films as well. So we've sort of done all the channels, but I would say about 75 to 85% of the funding is coming from us, Jeremiah and myself. And usually a lot of it's funneled through the commercial corporate business that I do, which is video production. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
Gotcha. Well, so the film explores the theme of the supernatural, specifically the Judeo-Christian supernatural. The iconography of Christianity is very meek and mild. Even the depiction of Jesus violently crucified has a very soothing connotation because the purported reason that he's being subjected to it is to save us. So that same iconography can be very sinister when blended with undertones of evil, like the scene in the film where the crucifix is in the center of the spinning table. So what are some of the different ways that you played with making Christian iconography evoke the sinister? Maybe even some ways that weren't evident, but were more on a subconscious level.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes back to that conversation that I had with Allison when we were talking about how religion is interesting for, of course, many different reasons, but in particular, people's perspective of it, and how a lot of different people within the same religion can have a massively different perspective and what it can mean to them and what it can feel to them. And I was intrigued by how the religions as a whole, and usually the people of them, sometimes use that to their advantage, and it can unfortunately be a bad thing. And I think that ironically, it ties quite well into the idea of sin and the idea that people, can be the most evil, right? Or they can do evil. So for me, it was sort of embedding the film with the idea that one of the things that we kept saying during production was this was religious seduction. This whole idea that basically this religious experience seduced Haley and Sarah, who played our two leads. And so Sarah, who was our lead, Layla, she basically is being seduced by religion as a whole, right? If you look at it maybe from a bigger metaphorical standpoint, but then also just by the angels, kind of this representation of all things bad, all things evil. And that was kind of one of the things that we really wanted to do, was make the angel not be this terrifying, horrible thing at first. There's a seductive quality to her, and, she looks like a model and she kind of moves gracefully, and it's not inherently scary right at the beginning. And I think, that's kind of what those pieces of religion can be. And obviously this can go the opposite way in the past, things like cults and stuff, where you're seduced by a wonderful idea and then you're shown something much worse. So it was kind of trying to look through that lens as much as possible, and then letting some of those elements of the stuff we have in front of us be scary, right? The cross, it is scary. I mean, you think about the idea of, remove yourself from the religion 100%. It's the idea that this is a depiction of someone dying that you are worshiping, right? And obviously you can look at that from the positive angle, right? Like the sister does, who is very religious. And then you can look at it from Layla's perspective, where she's kind of afraid of things, right? Like this whole idea is foreign to her, and her sister telling her, I see this angel. That's kind of terrifying. And then for her then to be seduced just like her sister was, it kind of feels like the cycle in which I think the people of religion can usually bring, right? They can seduce people, and especially someone who's at their weakest point, which we hopefully try to set up that, Layla's a kind of a weak point there.
Yeah, you bring up seduction. I don't know, other than the explanation that her sister gave, I'm not sure what her angel or version of an angel, how he, she, it approached her, but what we see at the end is, at least to me, I would think objectively to everybody else, is kind of sinister and evil, but it seems like Layla is kind of embracing that, even though the, quote unquote angel is saying some god awful things. So like, was that a reflection of her own mindset as to the way she felt about herself?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was a bit of acceptance too. One of the things Jeremiah and I talked a lot about in this was that Layla as a character was someone who felt lost, who was at their weakest point, and really was just looking for acceptance. And, a lot of times in religions, that's what people are looking for, is they're looking for acceptance. And, I know, like, for instance, a lot of prisoners end up becoming very religious post being in prison because there's a sense of someone cares about them, someone believes in them, right?
Mm.
And I think what it's kind of doing is reflecting all of these horrible things that she thinks about herself. And it's as if it's saying one thing, doing another, right?
Mm.
It's saying these horrible things, but it's almost showing her the acceptance and the belief that she can be something different. And I think there's also a part of that magical experience we're trying to hopefully make it seem like that a lot of people have, where it's the unexplainable. Layla's having that moment too, where she kind of can't explain or describe why she feels this way, but the angel says, do not be afraid, which of course is, I believe it's the most quoted statement in the Bible. And I actually didn't even catch on to that. That was Jeremiah's magic in his writing.
Oh, really? I never thought about that.
So I mean, that kind of goes back to the last question too, like a little bit of extra elements of religion in there. But I think it allows her to have this final acceptance. And I think the other piece of it is she almost doesn't care what this thing is, whether it's bad or good or religious or not. It's the idea that it truly accepted her for who she is, and she feels like she's herself for that moment. That was sort of what we were always going for, is that she has this moment, no matter what it means or what it is, it's her moment.
Awesome. Well, the next film I watched, entitled Two Players Required, had some really great jump scares and also featured what I would call anticipatory jump scares that never happened but scared you anyway. So when you were planning the jump scare, or planning the jump scare in general, I imagine it must be like a magician setting up methods of misdirection. But when there's ultimately nothing to be scared of but your own anticipation, what do you do differently to set those scenes up?
Yeah, it's tough, and I don't want to pretend to be the master of this by any means. I think that a lot of what jump scares and what tension is playing that magic trick on the audience, right? And using the fact that they know they are sitting down to watch a horror film to your advantage. Actually, that was one of the reasons why we named it Two Players Required. Somebody in the comments was like, oh, like you've spoiled the ending. And I'm like, well, no, that's actually what we want to do. We want you to anticipate that you know what's going to happen. Like, you understand that there's going to be a second player. And if anything, it works to our advantage, because then you sort of understand why all of this is going to happen in a way. I think about movies like The Omen, right? It's like the title is telling you what you should be looking for during the film, right? Like, we know this thing is the omen of something worse. So kind of using those elements, everything from the title to the fact that you have to remember your audience probably knows they are sitting down to watch a horror film. So letting, moments linger or letting silence be silence, those are those little things that you can do, I think, to make an effective, scary moment, because your audience is in a certain position. I think it would be very different if you went in thinking you're watching a comedy and you use some of these same tactics. I don't think it would work the same, because I think you're anticipating something different. So I think kind of using the years and years and years of people watching horror movies and kind of knowing what to expect to try to subvert those, but also feed into some of them. Let things be a little scary and a little cliche if they can be, because sometimes it works and sometimes it may work in your favor and people may enjoy that. And at the end of the day, you want to make something that's scary and that people can enjoy. So it's kind of finding that fine balance, but usually things like sound and pacing. I think pacing in particular is one of the biggest ways that you can sort of let moments that don't have to be a jump scare still feel eerie and like they're dragging on a little bit, but in a good way, hopefully.
Yeah. I always kick myself when it pans to a scene and I'm like, oh, here it comes. Oh, nothing. All right.
Right.
Freak me
Yeah.
out.
Well, it's like when you hear the dead silence in like the theater, especially where the sound just drowns out. You're like, I know there's going to be this giant stab. Yeah. Yeah. Which can be good and it cannot be so good.
Yeah. Still saying that even though the end result is nothing, I still get scared. It's just like, oh, they tricked me. Damn it.
Which is great. I'm glad. I'm hoping that can be the case for most people, because I think that's what makes not just a, haunted house, right? You can go to a haunted house, people can jump out at you and scream.
Yeah.
But it's how can you make something that's, rewatchable and has that ability?
Yeah, because when you keep expecting something and it's not happening, but it's still scaring you, it drives you nuts because you're like, oh my God, I can't take anymore. This is too much.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes that insanity can be its own source of fear, right? Like there are movies that I've definitely seen where it feels like never ending and you're like, wow, I can't handle this almost, which it's a tough thing to balance for sure from a tone perspective. But yeah, I mean, if you can hold somebody in tension for a long time, it's perfect.
Yeah. Well, you are credited as both director and editor on this film, and I've been told that when directors edit their films, it's sometimes hard for them to, quote, kill their darlings, especially when it comes to not using a shot that was really hard to get just right. So were there any darlings that you had to kill for this film, and were any of them necessary because of the need to visually keep the film moving due to not having dialogue or monologue?
Not so much with two players required, mainly because 2 players required really came from this idea of, so we knew we were going to be shooting It Visits Me, and we were like, okay, we want to do like sort of a warm-up short film. It's very simple. It's one location. It's one day. So there wasn't a ton that we shot that didn't make the actual film because we had to be pretty efficient. I will say, though, one of the things that I really wanted to get into there more was we had the split diopter shots of the game pieces moving across the board. And there definitely was a few extra angles that I think sold it a little bit more, but it was really tricky to balance the speed of the situation, which was there were 2 things going on at once. This thing was coming out of this box and this game piece was moving. So how do you balance that with Sarah's reaction? And then also be able to let the audience know that this game piece is moving. And it was really important to me to show it in slightly a wide shot to show that this was a somewhat of a visual effect. Because I think if you see it close up move, it's not scary. Like you just know like, oh, it could be fake. It could be manipulated. But having it in a wider shot, I thought was going to make the audience like kind of question, how did they do that? Right. That kind of feels magic. So there wasn't a ton that hit the cutting room floor on that. But I will say in other projects, there definitely have been moments or things that we've just cut. And it is hard being the editor and the director. The one thing that I do like about it is being able to control pace. So there is a lot of times where, doing commercial video, I shoot things knowing exactly how I'm going to have to put it together later in the edit, which can be really helpful. Sometimes passing that off can be difficult because then you're trying to describe to someone else, oh, well, I did this thing because I knew I could do X, Y, Z. So I'm actually very excited because in the future, I have the hopes of working with an editor. We've actually been talking with someone recently who might take on some of the short films, because that is one thing that I would love to know is, can somebody come in and sort of take a different perspective and get a different look at these projects and just say, you know what, this needs to get cut. Let's cut it. And I don't have to think twice about, and I can see their fresh take of it. Right. Because I mean, for me, that's the whole thing, is a collaboration, and getting everyone's input is awesome. So being able to do that would probably benefit.
Yeah. Well, your next film, The Rickety Man, is about a man, his son, and daughter who are grieving the loss of his wife and their mother. And this is a period piece with a very high production value. It's labeled as being award-winning. Can you tell us about the award?
Yeah, so actually, I know people on the podcast and audio can't see, but there's a little award back there that is my Horror Origins Best Short Film. But yeah, we took it to a lot of different festivals. It premiered at Screamfest. Horror Origins, I believe we swiped quite a few. We had like Best Short Film. I think it was Best Cinematography, Best Actress. And we have IMDb, a lot of the awards are there, but a lot of them really pertain to either like cinematography or Best Actress. And then we also had, I believe, a costume in one or two, but they were all kind of in some of those like mid-tier horror films. So it was really cool. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go to any of these festivals, but it was really cool. Like the trophy is really cool. I have it in my office. It's like a mummy. So being able to just have that like sitting in my office is kind of fun. And I also think people getting the recognition for their incredible job. Josh Bernales, who was our cinematographer, he was amazing. Like absolutely just did a knockout job. So for him getting to win Best Cinematography, and of course, Ava was just so good as the actress. She really did amazing. So for her to be able to get the recognition too was really awesome. And Summer Moore, who was our costume designer, same thing for her to be able to say like, I got best costumes. And that's what excites me about the fact that we got to go out to festivals and win some awards was it sort of just showcased how difficult it was to make this and that all these people put in their blood, sweat, and tears for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I heard a few different awards relating to the production as well as costume. Definitely. I mean, the reason I referred to it as a period piece is because it literally felt like a major production, like something that was going to go on for 2 hours. And Best Actress, yes, Ava Torres, her acting is superb. And I was curious to know, actually, my next question was going to be, was there any point during your work with her when you actually got a little viscerally creeped out by her performance? And can you tell us a little bit about what your direction was for her in those chilling scenes, like how you got her to affect what she portrayed?
Yeah, I mean, I will say the funniest thing about Ava is that she is the nicest girl ever. Like in between takes, she was smiling, she was laughing. She was just like a fireball. Like this girl's energy was through the roof at all times and there was no stopping her. And it's one of the reasons why we cast her, because when we met with her, it was just like, this girl does not stop acting. Like she's just always on. So it's funny. There weren't really a ton of times that I were creeped out. It was more of amazement. Like watching her work was so incredible because at the time she was 9 and it's not easy casting for a 9-year-old in a horror film. There's a lot of kids that kind of went with the traditional creepy kid sort of thing, but it was really hard for the children to be able to balance this very adult matter, right? This is an adult story about grief and these horrifying things. And then there's this girl who has to kind of be the beacon for all of it. So watching Ava work, it was more mesmerizing than anything. Each take, it was like watching the most magical thing you could ever experience. And in particular, like in the scene in the field with her father, with Russell, or who's playing her father, and they run together and she's crying. Like I remember the first couple takes, like I almost started to tear up because Ava was so good. So, definitely wasn't as scary, but I will say too, I mean, I really can't take the credit for how amazing she was. For me, directing a young actress like that, what was really difficult was just making sure that she felt comfortable and that she was not being exposed to too much of the horror of the film, but also being able to let her understand that these are some more adult themes. So it was really trying to be as relatable as possible and make her feel like, she is the star because she is the star and let her understand the emotions, but on her level. And I think a lot of it was letting her tell me what the emotions were. So it was sort of like, what do you think this is? How do you feel here? Because she might tell me it reminds her of a movie that she knows, right? And it's probably very different from a movie that I would mention, right? So for her to be able to say, I was thinking of this movie or I was thinking of this moment, it feels a little bit more approachable. And then having fun, letting her know that she was doing a great job, that she was able to be free and be able to go as far as she wanted. If she wanted to do something really intense, let's do it. Or if she wanted to pull it back, let's do that as well. And I think that kind of goes with working with any actor too, is just making sure they feel like they understand who the character is. And a lot of what Ava was trying to do was, because we didn't want her to be too creepy, like right off the beginning, right? We wanted to kind of feel like there was this bleeding, there was this slow growth. So a lot of it was trying to get her to understand like there's something wrong. Like it's like you don't feel good, you feel sick. Right? We're like, it's pretty relatable. Everybody knows when you feel sick or when you don't feel great, you kind of just feel off. So it's like, how can we tell her you have to feel off? And then later it's like, okay, now you're creepy, right? Like now is the creepy time, right? Like the end of in the climax of the film, right? She gets to kind of go all out. And a lot of it was like, we told her it was like, you're teasing him. Like you're teasing your dad. Like you're sort of like, haha, look what I can do. So it was, again, making something that was relatable and understandable to her that still kind of hints at the horrific, right? But it wasn't, just downright terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, not only, as you mentioned, great at the scary aspects of the performance, but yeah, definitely the emotional, even generating a screen presence. And you said 9 years old?
Yeah, she was 9 years old. And
Wow.
yeah, the whole casting process was really incredible because she just stood out so much. And we knew instantly, like, oh, this is the girl.
Yeah.
She's from Texas and we're in New York. So it was, can we get her here? And thankfully we did, because she just killed it. And Russell did an incredible job too. And the two of them just got along so well and were able to really just make something special.
Nice. Well, this film was written by Jeremiah Lewis, with whom I've noticed you've worked with numerous times. So how did you guys join forces?
Yeah, so it was kind of a funny happenstance where I had seen a friend of mine who's a filmmaker. They were judging a short film competition, or at least what I thought was a short film competition. So I went to the website and it was called Killer Shorts. And I found out that it wasn't a short film competition. It was a short script competition. And I had a short film at the time called The Faceless. And I was sort of like in this in-between stage. COVID was, running rampant. It was 2020. And I didn't really know what was the next step. Like, I felt like I was running into this wall with my own writing where I liked the story or the concept of what I was coming up with, but I felt like there was so much more that could have been fleshed out. And I saw that Jeremiah had The Rickety Man, which was a finalist. I believe it was like a semifinalist. It was definitely in one of the later categories. And I reached out because you could actually reach out to each writer and ask to read the script. So I reached out and we just kind of hit it off. And we started talking about The Rickety Man. And I really loved the script. I thought it was so just oozing with like tone. And the script is even bigger than the short. Like, we had to cut so much out for just production. Like, there was just a lot we couldn't do. There was horses and, more grotesque stuff. And I talked to him and we just really hit it off. And it was kind of interesting because I really loved The Rickety Man. And there was this kind of moment, I believe this was December of 2020, roughly, where we kind of looked at each other and it was like, are we in pre-production? And it was sort of like, I think we just want to option this. So we worked together, and Jeremiah is like truly one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Like, he is so humble. He is so smart. He's an incredible writer, and he's the most collaborative person I think I've ever worked with. He's so good about being able to take feedback or take thoughts and process them and relay new feedback, right? Like, he's a true person of the craft and a real creative. So we just really hit it off. And ever since then, it's been, what's the next project we can do? Because teaming up like we have has been just awesome. And it's been amazing what we've been able to accomplish. He's also a great producer too. So Lucid was the first one that he was on after Rickety Man. He wasn't able to be at Rickety Man, but from every short then on after, he has been producing, making sure everything is going smoothly and going as well as it can be. And actually, he used to live in Rhode Island, and now he actually lives in New York. We live right down the street from each other. That was how well our collaboration has gone. So it really was awesome meeting him and being able to not just have a writing partner, but also a friend. Like, him and I love hanging out and watching movies. So it was just one of those things where you just never know what's going to happen. And I'm so glad that it did.
Very nice. Well, the ending of the movie, to me, seemed to suggest that grief itself was a ravenous, consuming beast. What was the message you were trying to convey in the closing scene?
Definitely. There was a lot of things. There was, on the practical side of things, this was a proof of concept sort of teaser for a full feature-length idea that is all about Liza, who she's writing to, actually originally the father's writing to. Mm-hmm. It's all about her coming and finding the home and sort of the aftermath of this. So on a practical note, that was very much what that ending was supposed to be. But absolutely, metaphorically and as a feeling, the Rickety Man is grief. It's also guilt. And it's something we don't touch in the short film as much, but it was definitely underneath a lot of it. Was the Rickety Man usually shows up when something bad happens, and in fact that someone is guilty for. Mm-hmm. And we don't say it in the short, but the idea is that Edward, the father, he has done something bad or feels guilty about the death of the mother. Not that he killed her or anything, but that he is in some way guilty for something that has to do with that. So the idea is that the Rickety Man has shown up because of that. And it's sort of this guilt grief monster. And yeah, I think to me at the end, and I think what Jeremiah laid out so nicely in the script, is that grief it will tear through and it will just wreak havoc on anyone, no matter what. Of course, in the short, my little brother who actually plays James, he's not eating. Like, he's sort of dealing with grief in his own way. And then, of course, Ava, she is dealing with grief in her own way, right? Mm-hmm. She's more of the possessor, right? She's being possessed sort of by the grief itself and tormenting Edward. But it's kind of just the idea that, like, the rickety man, this powerful thing that's always been there, is grief, right? It'll always be there. It'll always be powerful, right? In the rickety man, he's a sort of wealthy, well-off guy who doesn't really connect with his kids because, especially that time period, he was probably off doing whatever and his kids were off with his wife, right? So they have more of a connection too. So there's also that, like, there's this guilt of, I can't connect with my kids very well. And then there's the grieving of, it's going to come for me, right? So it's kind of a 2-for-1 with grief and guilt. But again, those weren't things that we like openly said in the short film. It was just kind of hopefully a nice little bed that we could lay underneath. And if people can pick it out and feel it, they can. And if they can't, hopefully it was something we would touch more on in the feature film.
Gotcha. Well, your film entitled Mother was your baby. You were the auteur par excellence. You wrote, directed, and shot the film. And I was wondering, what are some of the things that are easier about producing a film when you have that level of control? And what are some things that are more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, making films like that, to be quite honest, isn't fun.
And by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Let me just say,
no.
All of your films, that was my favorite. And I texted it to my wife, who watched it while she was at work and texted me back saying, "Oh my God, that was badass." So sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm so glad. That's great. But it is funny because what's interesting is there is a sense of control in you control every aspect of it, right? Whether it's every frame, every moment, every word you can control, which can work to your advantage. At the time, I was much younger. I really was doing this like as low budget as I possibly could. I liked the concept a lot. So I think I was super passionate about it, which let me take full control of it. The disadvantage is that it's very difficult, right? And, you don't get outside perspective. Like, I think the short works because it's so concise and it's so quick. And it was originally another kind of proof of concept that I was trying to pitch this feature film for. So I think in that case it works, but I do think as I try to scale up production and do bigger things, it becomes a lot harder. What was fun about that short in general was, and it's funny, so Mother is actually like a director's cut of a short film I did called The Alive that's on Crypt TV. It's only one small scene added back, but it's just slightly different. And it added a little bit that I thought worked that Crypt TV didn't really like. So being able to see that short film have this like new resurgence has been very interesting because I almost didn't re-upload it with the new scene. I just kind of thought, I'll let it live on Crypt TV's channel. But it always bummed me out that it wasn't on my channel. It didn't have that scene in it. And I thought, you know what? Like, I can re-release it with a new name that is the director's cut, right? Like my version of it. So that's one of those ones that had something on the editing room floor for sure. So, having that kind of control lets me do stuff like that, which I think in this case worked. But I do think in a lot of other cases, it's more fun to expand and have more people there to collaborate with and just get better ideas with and bounce things off of people.
Can you tell us which scene?
Yeah. So in the short where the mother and the daughter are eating dinner and they're like just eating like crazy. And then she stands up and then we see that the mother is also standing up, kind of watching her. They didn't really like that because they thought it felt a little goofy.
Really?
Yeah. Which
the eating?
Yeah. The eating part.
Okay.
Because like I could give or take the eating, but I thought it showed the kind of hunger that was insatiable. Right.
Yeah.
And then I really liked the fact that when she stood up and the daughter was having her own moment, then the mother is like, it's as if she's only ever watching the daughter. Like she doesn't care about anything else. It's only, I got my eye on the target, right? So that part excited me. But yeah, they just kind of thought that the eating was like almost comedic. And I kind of disagreed, which is why I always wanted in there. Mm-hmm. But I understood that for their audience, I think they were going for a little bit of a different feel. So we cut it out. But I just thought it transitioned nicely. And I thought it made mom's acting weird. And then it shifted the focus for when she's looking at her. It's like, eyes are on you. This is going to go bad now. So I'm glad that it got to have its kind of second life, and it's oddly done very well, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could agree that the eating is comedic out of context, but within context, it's extremely off-putting, and the standing in the background is eerie as hell.
Well, thank you. I'm glad. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you were to watch it like on TikTok randomly, you might be like, oh,
What's
that's
wrong with
kind
this
of
woman?
weird. Like, yeah, it's kind of goofy. But yeah, so I'm glad it worked for you then, at least, and your wife.
Yeah. Well, so your film Lucid is about a widower who has the power to lucidly dream and has to save his wife from an evil entity. The concept of lucid dreaming is very interesting to me and is supposedly a real thing. I think the first time it came on my radar, I saw some sort of visor you could wear while you slept that detected the rapid eye movement when you hit REM sleep, and it would give you some sort of a I think it was an auditory cue that you were dreaming to kind of let you know so you could lucidly dream. But wanted to know, when you were setting up the shots for this film, what was a characteristic that you wanted to make glaringly evident in this lucid dream state, and how did you accomplish it?
Yeah, Lucid was a fun one. So we had been actually writing the feature film as well at the same time, or like in and around the same time. So we kept thinking like, this is David Fincher's Nightmare on Elm Street. So there was a lot of this focused, controlled sort of crime feeling that like a Fincher movie has. And then there was kind of the absurdity of like a Nightmare on Elm Street, where there's kind of the wild dream logic and stuff like that. So, you know, one of the things that I think actually didn't land as well as we would have hoped was there's a reoccurring fork, which is this dinging fork. And one of the things that kind of got lost in production was we were really hoping to have it like, oh, we hear this dinging fork, and then we realize that it was his father the whole time dinging, you know, the glass, like putting him under in sleep. And it was one of those things that I think in the production day, we just kind of got so wrapped into the rest of it that we were yanked away and never really like showed it the way we really wanted it to, and to kind of get that feeling across. But I think a lot of what we were trying to do was make things feel, especially in the conversation scene, you know, it was supposed to feel tight and like everything was constricting. So one of the things that we actually did was we shot that whole scene where it's a single shot. So it's just one, and one, right? We're not seeing the two of them together in the frame. And then as the conversation switches to the REM sleep, the cameras turn and we sort of now are over each of their shoulders, kind of compressing the two of them. So that was kind of a little subtle thing we tried to do to make it feel like, hey, we're compressing this conversation. Now it's serious. Now things are bad. And then when we got to the dream stuff, there was a lot of like handheld camera movements or whipping movements that were hopefully going to feel more aggressive and more dangerous. So that way it kind of, I don't want to say conflicted with the opening, but sort of it felt like a nice contrast to the dialogue scene. So they were supposed to feel somewhat different. And obviously color, you know, things like that. Like it's a lot warmer, and, you know, the bathroom's a lot cooler. So try to do subtle things like that. But honestly, the fork was the one thing that I wish would have came across more, because it was like, oh, this was the cool moment to be like, oh, he's in a dream. And we've seen some people that did like that and that did recognize that. But yeah, it's one of those things like in production, it just didn't kind of come through as much as we would have wanted.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing that I was wrapped up in that maybe made me miss that aspect was him trying to force the wine on him. At first, I didn't know what was going on because it was my first time watching the movie. But after thinking about it, I was like, oh, he was trying to force booze on him to get him tired and sedated so he could get him to sleep. Not realizing the glass, I guess, in some way tied in with the tapping of the fork.
Yeah. And I mean, you're onto something too. You know, there's a lot of stuff about addiction in this, right? And there's also this thing of like passing down addiction. So, you know, the father is this great lucid dreamer and the son is this great lucid dreamer, but he doesn't want to lucid dream. And ironically, one of the ways to not hit REM sleep is by drinking. So one of the things that we sort of did was that there was this alcoholism, right? Our main character is an alcoholic because he is suppressing his dreams in the feature film, not so much in the short film. Mm-hmm. So him trying to get the drink on him was a little bit too of their relationship, that, you know, this father-son relationship is not great. And, you know, dad's more lax about things. lucid dreaming is all about control, right? And the father's trying to control the son like he always has tried to control the son. And, the son's sort of trying to take things into his own hands. And, really the whole thing had started from, I was sitting down with Jeremiah and I'm like, it'd be really cool is like in Indiana Jones, like a father and son, and like someone gives them a mission. Like, what if two guys are sitting in a restaurant? The other one says, you need to do this. And Jeremiah went nuts and wrote Lucid. So, there's a lot of that like hereditary, not the movie, but the idea of things passed down hereditary or through, heritage and alcoholism, addiction, all that kind of stuff. So we're trying to play with a lot of things all at once, which I think, in my opinion, may have slightly hurt us, but I do think that a lot of people that I've heard from like those elements to it. So it kind of goes to show you that like you never know what people are going to take from a film and what people are going to like.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about a particular jump scare in the film, but I feel like I might be beating a dead horse by bringing up jump scares again. But I do have to bring to your attention that the bathroom stall scared the living shit out of me. So well played, sir. Well played.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad. No, that's actually, it's funny. So that jump scare was written into a feature film script that I had for a totally different project. And it was this girl was in this bathroom at this campgrounds, and that whole scene, kind of not the entire scene, but that jump scare plays out as expected. And we found while we were doing some location scouting and some ideas, it sort of fit perfectly into the story. And we were like, oh, well, what if we use this jump scare in this scene? And I've always knew, I'm like, this is going to be one of those fun jump scares that's going to work. Mm-hmm. And it worked on me, even when I was editing it. Like, it would scare me every time. So I was like, okay, I think we did that successfully.
Well, there's just elegance in its simplicity. It's not like a long drawn out thing. It's very quick, but it hits you like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that it's like, the scary version, right? Or the normal version would be she jumps up and we see her face up top, right? So it's kind of giving that slight subversion of expectation, like we were talking about, where hopefully this is not exactly what you thought you were going to see, yet still kind of feels familiar.
Yeah. Well, your film, The Faceless, was about a young woman who recalls a dream she had about a strange entity that wanted her face. This film was very abstract, and since you also wrote this film, I was wondering if you could elaborate on whether this film was metaphorical or meant to be purely visual. And when it came to the metaphorical possibility, I thought about the young women being college-aged and how academia can sometimes attempt to ruin people's individual nature and feed them into the proverbial thresher of uniform thinking. It's just something I was kicking around in my mind, if it is, in fact, supposed to be metaphorical. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish I could take credit and say that I had thought of all of these things. It definitely started much less than that. I will say that the idea of identity is something that's always really interested me, and the idea of losing your identity or feeling like you don't have an identity. That's always been a topic I've been really interested in. So I'd love to say that it was some great thinking and metaphorical idea of that. It wasn't, to be honest. So this was during COVID. It was probably, I think, July or August, and we were really itching to do something. And I'd really been wanting to do something. And I had this idea of what if this person were to say, I had this dream about this faceless thing. That might have even been a dream I had. I honestly don't remember. But it was this idea that, like, what if someone were to have a dream about this faceless person that says, like, I need your face to keep going? And I was like, wow, that'd be kind of creepy. And, I kind of simmered on it for a little while. And again, COVID, it was so hard to make anything. So it was sort of like, it's probably not going to happen. And then in August, where we are in upstate New York, things kind of opened back up for a little bit. We kind of had this pocket where, the weather was nice. People were outside again. Everything was kind of going well. Where we were, the numbers were doing really well. So there was kind of this moment around here where it was like, oh, like maybe, we're in a better spot now. So I was like, okay, well, we need to take advantage of this and we should make something, right? Of course, being safe and making sure that, like, we're as safe as possible. And so I had that idea I was kind of simmering on. And originally I had this image of these two girls sitting poolside, and it was this beautiful summer day because I love the summer. It's this beautiful summer day, and this girl's like reminiscing on this nightmare she had. And I thought what would be really fun is, what if we flopped the characters where we think we're with our lead character, and she tells us the story of, I had this horrible nightmare. I saw this thing. It wanted my face. and then to flip flop it and have it be the opposite character who then we go into the kind of scary scene with at night. And then the idea of, our other character comes back as sort of like an omen a bit. This thing is coming for you. So the idea of like individualism and identity is definitely always on my mind. It comes up very often in a lot of the stuff that I write in topics. So I'm not sure where it comes from, to be honest. Like I haven't dived into my own psyche to figure that out. But I think a lot of times around that age, I think a lot of people are searching for their identity. They're searching for who they are. They're trying to understand who they are. And I do think that a lot of times they feel like they've been robbed of who they are, right? I mean, there are a million different ways as to why that can be. So I think that it's, I like the idea of characters who are interesting and who aren't perfect, right? Who are struggling. I think they make for much better characters. When a character is too cool and they're too good at everything, it's not as fun, right? Like maybe once or twice it's fun, but when they struggle, I think that's what's more interesting and it feels more real, right? Like we all have real struggles and real things we deal with. So for me, these two girls who are at a pivotal point in their life where maybe they don't really know who they are or what they want, having something feeling like it's going to steal that from them is terrifying. So again, I wish I could say it was this great metaphorical idea, but it was definitely just like, what if you had your face stolen? No identity.
Well, your film entitled The Undoing was a really fun young adult short film. And the classic situation of a group of young people getting together to conjure a spell or play with a Ouija board is always great fodder for a horror story. So I liked the ending. I liked how it showed without telling when it came to the disposition of Rose and the reason for it. I often feel like leaving the ending implied can create a better sense of horror because it leaves it up to the viewer's imagination, which tailors the ending to each individual viewer. And regardless of the budget of the film, a viewer's imagination can do some pretty high budget stuff. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that it worked because that's the horror for me, right? Is when you do an ending like that, you never know if people are going to love it or hate it. And The Undoing was really, for us, an experiment of kind of similar to Two Players Required, an idea of we have this really core, basic, small concept. Can we do something fun? I loved Goosebumps as a kid, and I loved like the PG-13, just like that YA horror. And I always thought it'd be fun to do something in that. We do a lot of things that are pretty dark and creepy. And I thought, it'd be kind of fun to do something that's a little bit more geared toward a younger audience. It's a little less, disturbing and something just kind of fun. And originally we had this idea to shoot it at a carnival, and we actually had everything set up, and then the carnival fell through. So it's kind of a bummer, but we thought, let's just go back to basics and make something that's about this group of girls who, there's so much when you're young and with friendship and jealousy with other friends and things like that. And then we thought, let's kind of play with social media, right? Like I don't know anybody personally who's like influencer status. I mean, there's some people I know that are kind of there, but it is interesting. Like, what if you were a 17-year-old girl or, 17-year-old boy, whatever, and your friend becomes a famous influencer, right? Like it's happening now. And how interesting is that, right? Where, they feel like they're stuck to their phone and their phone is their friend. And it's a lot different than it was, a long time ago. So we just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to play with. And I knew when Jeremy and I were first talking about it, we need to make something that is really short and sweet. So leaving it on a fun, good cliffhanger like that is nice because you don't know what happened, right? You don't know where she went. You don't know what happened, just like the characters don't. They don't know where she went. They don't know she ever existed. So hopefully it'd be something that's kind of fun. It's kind of spooky in tone, right? So I have a younger sister and I think about her, like, could she watch it with her friends and enjoy it and have fun, and it's not terrifying and it's not like disturbing where, my mom or their parent, her friend's parents are going to yell at her or whatever. So it was fun getting to try that.
Yeah. It's funny how, even though the content in a young adult novel or a young adult film has to be restrained to an extent, it can still be pretty creepy. I'm trying to remember the name of the show that used to come on Nickelodeon I watched when I was
Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yes. That used to...
it's terrifying.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like if I rewatched that now, it would still, give me the visceral feels that it used to when I was a teenager.
Oh, absolutely. I found a lot of those on, I think like Netflix has Are You Afraid of the Dark as well as Goosebumps. So I've like rewatched some of those
Okay.
and like looking on them. And it is funny because, yeah, like for me, Goosebumps, the haunted mask, I thought was always terrifying. And it was creepy. Like, and even now I'm like, these are still kind of creepy and messed up. Like, this would scare the shit out of me if I was a kid. It did.
Yeah.
And yeah. And it's fun. And, I wish, like, I think the carnival version of it probably would have been a little scarier because there was some kind of ideas that we had that we could play with. I remember, actually, it was an R.L. Stine. I can't remember the name of it. It wasn't Fear Street, but it was like some other R.L. Stine spin-off show, like 2001 or something. And they had one where all these kids went to like a carnival and they saw a medium, right, at the carnival. And she like granted somebody a wish or something. And it was very similar. And I just remember thinking about how like eerie that was. And it was like the be careful what you wish for tale, which is age old, but it was just kind of fun to think like, oh, could we make something like that? And I mean, I think like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark that came out in 2019. I thought that was a really great example too of like really creepy YA horror where it's like, this isn't rated R and like a kid could watch this, but it is terrifying. Like this stuff is scary.
Yeah, it'll lead to some sleepless nights.
Yeah. And the other thing too is like we had gone a while without making anything too. We had come off, I believe, Lucid at the time, and it was like almost a year where we hadn't made anything, and it kind of felt like, oof, I'm really itching to get back in the director's chair and do something. So that was the other thing too. It was like, let's get back and let's make something.
Yeah. I know the feeling, not movies per se, but the creative impulse.
Yeah, when the itch gets you, you're like, all right, I'm here.
Yeah. Well, your film entitled The Forgotten was made for the My Road Reel competition in 2018. And before I ask you about the story, I wanted to ask you a bit about the competition. And I'm assuming road gear was used for it because I am a total nerd when it comes to tech and I love Rode products. I'm not sponsored by them, but Rode, if you're listening, I'm available.
Right. Yeah. It was kind of like the heyday for, I would say, internet filmmaking. Like there was this time from probably 2012 to 2018 or so where internet filmmaking, and in particular films, right? Like it wasn't directed towards content creation or, tutorials or that sort of thing or vlogs. It felt very much towards films. And Rode did this competition where they would give out like tons of gear. I think it was like $250,000 in gear.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was great because you could submit and you could win. And like even the semifinalists, you got like a badge. So I believe one year we were a semifinalist or we were like a semifinalist in the horror genre competition. And it was a great competition. It sucks that it's not been around for years. I think like 2021 it stopped. COVID definitely did a number on it for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it was a great competition and I did it for a few years in a row. So I'm trying to think. I think it was a Rode NTG2 we used. It was a shotgun mic on loan. Post sound versus on-set sound is really crazy, the difference. And it's interesting to me to watch it because we work with an audio engineer, Jacqueline Mignot, who's our audio engineer. She's done pretty much the last like 5 or 6 projects. And it is insane what you capture on set versus what you do later, right? Where you use a condenser microphone later in order to get those really like kind of just wide sounds that then you might crush to match the shotgun mic that you used on set. So it's weird. There's definitely like a bit of, oh, we've always done it this way kind of thing. And of course, every mic has their own like things, like the shotgun mic, like the NTG2. What was so nice is it was so clean. And actually why I did a voiceover in it, because I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if we did this like voiceover piece. So it was this really clean voiceover on the NTG2. It's kind of like a way to showcase it.
Okay. Well, your film entitled They Are Watching is about a young woman who is absolutely tormented by her past and present. She has a cheating boyfriend and starts to develop severe headaches. And when she seeks treatment, she's talked down to by a nurse in regard to her history of bulimia, which is probably the result of trying to look perfect to satisfy her very vapid boyfriend and the overall need to look perfect in suburbia. So were the entities that were watching her symbols of the judgmental eyes of those around her? And if not, what did they symbolize?
You're definitely right on that one. That was something that I definitely did have the, sort of the metaphor baked in. Yeah. I really wanted to tell this story of suburbia. I don't come from suburbia. I've never lived in that type of area, really. I lived around it and I saw it. And it always interests me how, and not to sound pretentious, but like in the way, Shakespeare, this classical type of literature, it's all about the rich sort of like whining, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to write this idea that was about like the perfect golden suburbia and all of these people that were sort of whining about awful like things that, normal people have to struggle with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that our lead, she feels like an outcast. She didn't come from that life. She wasn't used to that kind of stuff. So sort of feeling alienated and like she's in a different world all the time really was interesting to me, that like, oh, you'll have to live in this other world. And these people act different. They speak different. They do different things, and different things are sort of normal to them. So it was this kind of idea that like all of these entities are sort of like, I don't want to say the lost souls in a way, but are kind of like the watching eyes, right? They can kind of be a little bit twofold, where they're the watching eyes of all of those who are judgmental and who, cast their sort of thoughts onto you. But then they're also kind of the lost souls of all of the people who are all in the background of these people's lives that, they think are their, they're the extras in their own story when they too are people. Mm. And I think that idea has always interested me. And the hope was that we can create something like that, where it's like all of this stuff is caving in on her because she feels so judged and she feels so just like she's out of her element and like she's sort of, everything's collapsing in around her.
Okay. Well, I don't think that I've seen your entire filmography, but I'm definitely going to get on that. But I watched the ones that were on your playlist. Are those the ones that you have the most involvement in?
Yeah, definitely. And I think those are the ones that, there are short films I made before that, but to be honest, I don't want to say I'm not proud of them. I'm proud of pretty much everything I've ever made in some way, shape, or form. But I think it was where things started to turn. I started to take it more seriously. Ironically, it was with The Forgotten. It was the least, I don't want to say least effort, but it was like the least I expected from a project. And I ended up talking to a manager who I didn't know how managers worked in Hollywood or anything like that. And that sprung sort of this new, it kind of felt like a new pathway open for me. So ever since then, anything pretty much past The Forgotten were ones that I took really seriously and that I kind of understood what they could do for me.
Okay.
So you watch all the good ones.
Well, you do commercials as well, which I imagine is very busy and demanding. You founded Black Mountain Visuals in 2016. Can you tell us a little bit about this company?
Yeah, so Black Mountain Visuals really started out just as me doing like freelance stuff, taking senior photos. And I was young, so I wanted to come off a little more professional. So I was like, you know what? I need to come up with a name. I need to come up with a brand. And I need to seem like I'm a business. I'm not just me. Because I technically started a little bit before that, but I was just sort of like going under my own name as my own person, right? Just doing whatever. So yeah, for the last 8 years now, I have been creating commercials or corporate videos or pretty much anything I can, to make money. And I love making videos, obviously. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's great because it allows me to make money, pay my bills, right? Stay afloat. But at the same time, it allows me to have the equipment and buy the gear that I need to make these short films. So it's helped create the ability for me to even make these shorts, because I know a lot of filmmakers who they want to make films, but they don't have the equipment. They don't have the crew. They don't have whoever it may be. So being in the commercial world, it allows me to have all those assets kind of for me to use almost at any time.
Yeah, I love hearing about those perfect balances, like you talking about your commercial business. I had on Spencer Keller, who does video production, for a company and then makes his short films, and plenty of writers that I've had on work as ghost writers or work as editors, but then they have the resources and the time to write their own stuff. I love it when people can find that perfect balance to kind of make money and yet still be involved in what their passion is, and then have, the funds and the time to work in that passion. So Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they kind of lift each other up. So, which is always nice. And I love Spencer, by the way. Spencer's a good friend. So
Yeah.
I listened to that podcast and I loved it.
Oh, yeah. 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 I love his work. It's awesome. Well, you mentioned in your bio that you began filmmaking with a VHS camcorder from your parents, which I totally remember playing with myself, but, wasn't doing anything serious, just screwing around. But how old were you and what kind of films were you making?
Yeah, so it's funny. I didn't know that I was filmmaking then, right? Like it was just one of those things where it felt like I was just messing around. But yeah, I was about 5 years old and I started kindergarten and there was a project we had to do called All About Me. And the idea was you had to tell everyone about who you were. And I had been playing with my parents' video camera for probably a couple months at that point. And I just liked something about it interested me, the fact that I could film and like make something and show it, right? Like at the time you hook it up to the TV and that's how you watched it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something fun about that. And I ended up making an All About Me video with the help of my parents. That was, I tried to do like camera tricks where I would hold the curtain in front of the camera lens and cut and then restart it with the curtain. And then I would change scenes and I would do these different things. And I didn't realize that what I was doing was filmmaking. And I was, the early version of it. But I would make skits. A lot of them were like funny comedic skits. And I would do that for a long time. I would do it on the VHS camera for quite a while with my brother and I and anyone I could corral to get in there. And then I got a little older and I got a mini DV camera and used that for a while too, where again, I didn't know how to edit in software at all. So I would edit everything in camera. It was always like start, stop, change the camera angle, do whatever you have to do, undo costume, redo costume.
Mm-hmm.
So I played with that for a very long time until I got to sort of like middle school, junior high, where I had to do another project where I used a camera and realized I could edit these things on the computer. And it was Windows Movie Maker. So it was very like low end version of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned how to cut together some stuff. And I actually did a project where it was for Lewis and Clark. And I was Lewis and Clark. And I learned how to split screen. And that was like the dawn of like, oh, I can actually like really manipulate these things, not just kind of that old school trickery I had to do with my VHS camera back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been getting into video editing software to make book trailers and to just do like promotional stuff for when I release podcast episodes. So that initial joy that you're talking about, I'm feeling present day.
It's an exciting feeling. You're like, I can make anything I want. Like I can create any feeling a book trailer is a prime example, right? Where it's a totally different medium, yet you're able to create this excitement, this suspense, or, whatever it may be for a book that is a very different format and medium. So there's something exciting about that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned being inspired by some of the greats, such as Spielberg, Nolan, and Wan. Which director sparked your desire to make horror films specifically?
Yeah, so this actually was James Wan. And I know, that James Wan has since done like Aquaman and Furious, right, movies. So I don't want to say he's moved away completely and he's produced a lot. But I believe I was in probably 9th or 10th grade. And I was in the backseat of a friend's car and he had a DVD copy of Insidious and it was brand new.
Like, God,
it must have just come out. Yeah. And my dad's a huge horror fan and I had watched every horror movie you could ever imagine throughout the mid 2000s. And it started to really, I thought, drop quite a bit in the late 2000s. And I felt like you were just getting a lot of those, like the Hatchet and, Hills Have Eyes sequels. And they're fun now. I can enjoy them, but they're definitely a very specific type of feeling. They were tough to watch. They're grimy. They're dirty. They were kind of slick. And so I was sort of fading from horror movies at that time. And I did not think of filmmaking as a real like path for me. I was thinking about going to school for music, being a music teacher, or doing something along the lines of music. And I saw this DVD and I was like, I don't know what this is. I've never heard of this. And this looks very different from all of the Hills Have Eyes and all the wrong turns that I've seen. And I watched that movie and I was blown away because it was the first time for me that I felt like I could realize what the director was doing. Like I was like, oh, I can see how he's using the camera to push us to places, or he's using every ounce of the frame to make us feel something. Or there was just so many elements that I realized like I can see the filmmaking. Like I'm not just watching a story, like I'm watching the filmmaking, the zooms, the way that he uses silhouette. And, of course, like when they have the little photo reel thing, there's just so many things that I just noticed that I had never seen before in filmmaking. It blew my mind.
Yeah.
So I instantly like researched everything I could about James Wan as a director. And I was like, oh, I've seen Saw. Like, okay, like that's cool. I like that. I went and watched Dead Silence at the time. And then I was anticipating his next movie and I didn't know what it was. And I started to learn more about other filmmakers and horror filmmaking and, went down the rabbit hole on YouTube of every YouTube filmmaker that I could ever find, trying to watch as much as I could. And then him coming out with Insidious Chapter 2 and The Conjuring pretty much same year was like another mind-blowing experience where I'm like, okay, I see where this is going. So that's why I have a huge love and respect for James Wan. And he pretty much pushed me from, I think this is fun and I enjoy doing this, to I can see doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, who was it? The name is escaping me. But the first really well-produced indie film I saw, I remember just thinking, it wasn't until I started doing audio editing and it translated over to what that must be like for video editing. I watched this movie. I'd seen it before, but I started watching it the way you were talking about, oh, I can see the filmmaking. I was like, man, this editing is just seamless. Like, it really changes your perspective when you start watching film.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you become kind of a student of it, right? And I think ever since then, I watch movies differently and I can enjoy them differently. And I can go back and watch older movies and enjoy them differently now because I have a different lens. The first time I saw Halloween or Friday the 13th, I was like, oh, these are scary movies. Like, I was a kid. That's all I knew. And now I look at them like, oh, Friday the 13th is a giallo, an American giallo type of movie, or, Halloween, right? Like, it's this psychological thriller that, you could argue is maybe from the 60s or 70s, kind of that fall over. So it's just being able to look at them differently and see filmmaking in a different way has been inspiring. And yeah, I mean, James Wan was the guy that did it for me.
Gotcha. Well, you do a lot of behind the scenes videos for your films. Do you feel behind the scenes videos enhance the viewer's connection with the film?
It definitely can. I mean, I love behind the scenes. Obviously, I'm a sucker for it. One of those other things too, I realized when I was a kid, I loved the behind the scenes. So it all makes sense now.
Gotcha.
But I also like demystifying this filmmaking, right? Like, when I first started, when I had first seen it, it was like 2010, 2011. And there was very little information on YouTube at the time. There was Film Riot, Indie Mogul, and like Vincent LaFerre and Philip Bloom, like these like four guys that were on YouTube, or four crews basically, that had filmmaking information. There's very few. Now it's a very different landscape. And I think what a lot of content on YouTube has become now and behind the scenes is content creation. It's all about commercials, or it's all about social media videos or content. And I think there's less and less and less every day of traditional filmmaking. So like, why do these things work and why does it exist? Right. And it's one of those things where I think you can't beat classic filmmaking, because even the trendiest TikTok right now, it's based on some type of technology or thing that was developed, 100 years ago, right? A cool transition in a zoom shot is still a zoom that they used, maybe in the 50s, right? I don't know exactly when zoom lenses were created, but just that idea that like all of these things were based on something classic. And I like to try to give that information of like, this is why we did this, or this is how we did this. I'm also thankful too. I get sent equipment sometimes to showcase and use. So it's great because we get to make our short film with that equipment and then I can review it and I can talk about it. But yeah, I think just trying to demystify some of these things that, like, for the longest time I was researching how to make moonlight. Like, how do I do convincing moonlight? And I realized there's very many ways to do it. There's hard sources and soft sources. And, there's so much information on YouTube that a lot of it is tailored to these other mediums. So being able to say like, hey, this is how we did this exactly. This is why it worked. This is what we're looking at for inspiration. Hopefully this is helpful. And just kind of giving viewers a sense of how this comes together. Because I think sometimes you watch a short film on YouTube and you just don't understand how it even comes together. And a lot of people who love short films aren't filmmakers.
Yeah.
And you can tell, right? They comment and they don't understand certain things of what we're doing.
And showing that hopefully can explain to them, this is how we made this. And this is, there's 5 of us behind the camera. There's not 100, right? This isn't a Hollywood production. And I think it's fun to be able to kind of give that sneak peek.
Gotcha. Well, in the same vein of demystifying the process, do you have any financial hacks for aspiring filmmakers that are just starting out and obviously working on a budget?
I mean, there's a ton. And that's good. I think the biggest thing is finding a career that allows you to do this. I think if you can set yourself up financially, and I am not like in financial heaven, right? With commercials, it's all over. But having a job close by allows me to have the equipment, right? So it does help me quite a bit financially. So I think having a career that lets you do that is a huge thing first, right? Like whether it's saving up your own money or having a career that's close by so that way you're able to utilize those resources, that's huge. The other thing that I do quite often is I barter with people all the time because I have the commercial company. Mm-hmm. So quite often I will barter with people, mainly locations or like hotels and stuff. And I'll say, hey, listen, we'd love to use your location. I will make you a video in trade, like if that's cool with you. And some places say no. And a lot of places say yes, because for them, a promo video could cost thousands, right? It could be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for a promotional video at least. So be able to say to them, hey, give me 4 hotel rooms for 4 nights for my cast and crew, and I'll make you a promo video. It costs them very little to give you those hotel rooms. So they're like, please, like that's perfect. And same with locations, right? You may go to like a restaurant and say, hey, we really want to shoot in your restaurant. I know you're closed on Mondays. I'll make you a promo video if you can let us shoot there on Monday. And they'll say, sure, right? Like nobody's here anyway, right? Like we'll get a promo video for free. So I think know what you're capable of and know what you're good at. And can you offer someone something that's actually enticing, right? You don't want to offer someone something that's not valuable to them, right? If, someone does people's taxes and you try to offer them a commercial, they're probably not going to do it because they probably don't need it.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a huge thing I've done a lot is bartering. And then the other thing financially is just knowing what you're capable of and knowing what you have access to and rearranging your thought process to work within that, right? It's like they always say, write what you know, well, shoot what you know. If you have an apartment, so 2 players required was my apartment. The Undoing was my apartment. And a lot of the other places in our films were like other people's houses. The Faceless was my grandmother's house. She was actually moving out and her house was like empty. So it was kind of perfect. We were like, oh, well, this is great. No one's going to be here. And It Visits Me was a lake house of somebody we knew. They had this beautiful lake house and they weren't going to be there because it was like the shoulder seasons and it was kind of cold. So we said, hey, like, can we just shoot at your lake house? And I think if you're in like New York City and LA, it's really tough because no one's going to want to do it. But if you're in another market, I think there's a lot of play that you can do where people get excited to be a part of a movie. So if you're like, hey, I know you have a vacation home. Can I borrow it for a day? And obviously you want to be respectful and keep it clean and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But as long as you do all those things, they're excited because they're like, oh, how awesome is this? My house was in a movie. And we've had a lot of great feedback from people where they were super excited to do something really fun. So I think those are the biggest things. And, you can still write big stories. You can still come up with big, bombastic ideas, but tell the small version of that, right? You can make a Star Wars, but maybe hint at the world of Star Wars, but maybe you're only in the cantina, right? Like maybe you're only in one spot, but you're going to hint at the rest of it. And be a good magician, right? Like I think being a magician is knowing how to hide things. And sometimes it's like getting from A to Z as quick as you possibly can. And sometimes that's by tricking people with sound, with what they think they see, what they think they hear. So I think brushing up on a lot of those other behind the scenes, look at how people are doing these tricks and how they're doing it as well.
Awesome. Well, last question. What is the life of Cameron Gallagher like outside of filmmaking?
Oh boy, it feels like I only live filmmaking.
When do you
my
sleep?
life outside is right. Yeah, exactly. Honestly, I mean, I'm a huge movie watcher, so I'm always watching movies. My girlfriend and I love going to the theater to go watch movies. I'm also a huge Blu-ray collector, so still kind of movie adjacent. I love collecting physical media and watching movies for fun. So that's a huge thing. I love being outdoors and working out, things like that. So those are 2 like other hobbies. I'm also a huge football fan. I'm a big New York Giants fan. So I'm gearing up for the fall season of football. So honestly, movies are a lot of my life. Like they really are. And I'm glad that they are because I live and breathe it. Like I love watching movies. I love being a part of making movies, and they're so entertaining. But I also love being out in nature. I do think one of the best ways to make movies is to experience life. So go on vacation, go do fun stuff. Even if you can't afford a vacation, go out and walk in nature, go meet new people. So anytime I can get out and get to do things, I'm always excited to.
Awesome. Well, Cameron, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely the same. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it.
As we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your viewers know about?
I'm just excited that there are people out there who watch these films. And, sometimes you see a lot of negative stuff on YouTube, right? And I think what's really great is that there are a ton of super positive comments on all of these videos. And it's really exciting to hear that there are people out there who love this, right? There are people, and I see them. I read every comment. Mm-hmm. I know every single comment that's on every one of these videos. And I see the same people over and over who really enjoy being there, who really enjoy watching the film. So I want to thank all of those people for constantly coming back, for constantly watching, for, being super supportive, whether it was funding some of the films like Rickety Man, where we raised a ton of money. We had an awesome bunch of Kickstarter backers, to the people who just watch the videos and say something nice on them. Like, I see it and I really appreciate all of you, because I think without the awesome viewers of that community, and without the other awesome horror community as well, of horror filmmakers, there are some incredible horror filmmakers who, we have a group all the time that we all talk, and they're all just like the coolest people ever. So, having this whole community and building this whole community on YouTube has been a lot of fun, and it's just been great to be a part of. So thank you all.
Well, so your YouTube channel, best place to...
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, the YouTube channel is the best place to subscribe if you want to see the new short films. I only have Instagram as my social media, so please follow me on Instagram, which is just Cameron96G. I post some updates on there, especially when we're doing short films, bigger stuff. So most of the time I'm updating people on Instagram on some of those things, but I'm also on Vimeo and then Shortverse, which is kind of like the hub for a lot of the YouTube shorts. I have my own website, which is just CameronGallagherFilm.com. But yeah, Instagram is probably the best place to keep up with a lot of stuff that I'm actively doing. I try to post a lot of that stuff there. So,
all right, gotcha. All right, well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Cameron, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone that tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to follow my radio channel by clicking the link in the description so that you can listen live. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday when I will be joined by a writer of young adult horror that has turned a haunted house into a living monster. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.
God bless, we're breaking these runs. Life too short to play on speed run. Only get one, no option to rerun. Where Babylon goes, too high to reach them. Down to earth, stay grinding when storms come. Rat race, only one to run from. Better say cheese, but saying split in the funds. Living in the moment, I ain't worried about none. I'm straight chilling, back against the wall, too acquainted with the feeling. Like I lost the mark, find a way if I'm willing. Only fear God, not spreading this lost children. Price on my head, exported a few trillion. Doing side missions whenever I'm feeling. I'm built different, cruise with no ceiling. Sun shining on me, boy, I'm indifferent. Go! Yeah. barking like a matador. Come on, I'm ready to go get it like a Labrador. Dog days done and I'm tired of the tug of war. Broke off the leash and I ain't going back no more. I've been better ever after like Barrymore. Hold up, let me reset. Living in the matrix, used to sequence. I cracked the code, popped out the subnet. Walk around like I found a 20, that's a dubstep. Living in the moment, did you notice that ain't up yet? You can put the pressure on me, I ain't dropping one sweat. Used to be stressed hard, beating like a drum set. Breathe, stretch, let it go. Everybody need a refresh, go. Yeah.